At Thanksgiving, my father-in-law cornered me. Callista, for everyone's protection, add our names to your deed. I bought the house long before I met their son, but when the realtor pulled up the property records, their faces turned ghost white. Thanksgiving dinner was barely over when Lawrence Brennan trapped me in the hallway outside my own bathroom. His cologne hit me first, that expensive sandalwood smell that always preceded a lecture about fiscal responsibility or estate planning. My husband Keith was in the living room with his mother Virginia, oblivious to what was about to unfold. Callista, we need to discuss something important. Lawrence began, his voice carrying that authoritative tone he perfected during his 30 years as a corporate attorney. Virginia and I have been reviewing our family's financial situation, and we're concerned about asset protection. I leaned against the wall, already exhausted from cooking since 6 that morning. The house smelled like sage and roasted vegetables, scents that should have brought comfort, but instead felt suffocating as Lawrence invaded my personal space. Your property here? He continued, gesturing vaguely toward the vaulted ceilings and custom built-ins I'd saved for years to afford. It's quite valuable. With the current economic climate, we think it would be prudent to add our names to the deed. Just as a safety measure, you understand. My stomach dropped. This wasn't a suggestion. Lawrence Brennan didn't make suggestions. He issued directives wrapped in concern, always framing his control as protection. For everyone's security, he added, his pale blue eyes fixed on mine with an intensity that made my skin crawl. God forbid something happens to Keith or to you. We need to ensure this asset stays within the family. I bought this house in March of 2018, 3 years before Keith and I even matched on that dating app. The down payment came from my inheritance after my grandmother passed money she'd left specifically to me after watching my mother struggle through 2 divorces. The mortgage payments came from my salary as a senior graphic designer, every single dollar earned by my own hands. I'll think about it. I managed to say, my voice steadier than I felt. Lawrence's expression hardened. We're not asking for much, Callista, just some basic legal protection, unless there's a reason you'd want to refuse such a reasonable request. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Refuse, and I'd be branded as suspicious, selfish, hiding something. The Brennans excelled at this kind of manipulation, packaging their demands as family loyalty tests. Keith found me in that kitchen an hour later, scrubbing the roasting pan with more force than necessary. His brown hair was disheveled from his post-dinner nap, and he wore that confused expression he always got when navigating between his parents and me. Mom mentioned Dad talked to you about the deed thing, he said, reaching for a leftover roll. It's not a bad idea, you know. Just paperwork. Just paperwork. As if signing over partial ownership of my home was equivalent to updating our Netflix subscription. Keith, I bought this house before we met. With my money. Why would I add your parents' names to my property? He flinched at the sharpness in my tone. Our property, Cal. We're married. My name is the only one on that deed. Mine, because I bought it. I paid for it. And I've been paying the mortgage every month since. Keith's face flushed red, that defensive anger that emerged whenever anyone questioned the Brennan family logic. They're just trying to help. Dad knows about estate law. He's protecting us. From what exactly? From complications. From legal issues if something happens. Why are you being so difficult about this? I set the pan down with a clang that echoed through the kitchen. I'm being difficult because your father cornered me in my own hallway and demanded I sign over part of my house to him. That's not protection, Keith. That's a power grab. You're being paranoid. Those 3 words ended the conversation. Keith grabbed another roll and retreated to the living room where his parents waited, probably curious about what was taking so long. I stood at the sink, hands submerged in cold, greasy water, wondering how I'd ended up here. The next morning, I called my friend Paige. She'd known me since college, back when I was still figuring out who I wanted to be. We'd weathered bad relationships, career changes, and family drama together. If anyone would understand this situation, it was Paige. They want what she practically shouted into the phone. I repeated Lawrence's request while sitting in my car outside the grocery store, needing the privacy my own home no longer provided. Callista, that's insane. Why would you add their names to your deed? Keith thinks it makes sense. Estate planning, asset protection, all that legal jargon his dad loves. Paige was quiet for a moment. Do you remember when Keith's parents insisted on being added to your joint checking account? And you agreed because it seemed easier than fighting. I did remember. They'd framed it as helping us budget, offering financial guidance to newlyweds. Within 3 months, Virginia was questioning every purchase I made, calling to ask why I'd spent $40 at Target or taking Keith out for sushi. I closed that account and opened a new one in my name only, which led to a month-long Cold War with the Brennans. This is different, I said. though I wasn't sure I believed it. Is it? Or is it the same pattern wrapped in fancier paper? After I hung up with Paige, I sat in the parking lot and did something I should have done the moment Lawrence cornered me. I called a real estate attorney, not one of Lawrence's colleagues or golf buddies, but someone with no connection to the Brennan family network. Brenda Carril had an office downtown in one of those converted historic buildings with exposed brick and plants everywhere. She listened to my story without interrupting, her dark eyes sharp behind rectangular glasses. "Let me be very clear," she said when I finished. "If you add their names to your deed, they become co-owners. That means they have equal say in any decision about this property. Selling, refinancing, renovations, everything requires their approval. But it's my house. Not anymore. If you do this, removing them later is nearly impossible without their consent or expensive litigation." My hands were shaking. I'd known this was wrong, but hearing the legal reality made it concrete. Why would they want this? Brenda leaned back in her chair. Could be several reasons. Control, certainly. Some parents struggle when their children establish independence. Or there could be financial motivations I'm not seeing yet. Financial motivations. Your house is paid for, you said. Not entirely. I have about 8 years left on the mortgage. But you have significant equity. I nodded. The property value had increased dramatically since I'd purchased it. What I bought for $320,000 was now worth close to $550,000. That equity can be leveraged, Brenda explained. With their names on the deed, they could potentially take out loans against the property. You'd still be responsible for your original mortgage, but they'd have access to that value. The room felt smaller suddenly. They could take out loans on my house. As co-owners, yes. Or they could force a sale or simply refuse to allow you to sell if you ever wanted to move. I left Brenda's office with documentation, and I'd requested papers that showed the purchase history and current ownership status. My name only Callista Marie Brennan, formerly Callista Marie Russo. I kept my last name when Keith and I married, another battle with the Brennans that had lasted months. Keith was home when I arrived, sitting at the kitchen island with his laptop. He looked up with a tentative smile, clearly hoping yesterday's argument had been forgotten. "Hey, I picked up Thai food for dinner from that place you like." A peace offering, Keith handled conflict the way his mother did, by pretending it never happened and returning to normal routines until everyone agreed to forget. "We need to talk about the deed situation," I said, setting down my purse. His smile faded. "Cal, can we not? I thought we were past this." "We're not past it. Your father asked me to sign over partial ownership of my property, and I want to understand why." "I told you why. Asset protection." "Protecting what from whom?" Keith's jaw tightened. "Why are you making this into some conspiracy they're trying to help?" I pulled out the documents Brenda had given me and spread them across the counter. "This is the deed to my house. See this line? That's my name, just mine. I bought this property in March of 2018, 3 years before we even met. I know when you bought it. Then you understand why adding your parents' names makes no legal or financial sense. This house is mine, my investment, my equity, my responsibility." Keith stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood. "There it is. My house, my investment, my everything. Do you hear yourself? We're supposed to be partners, Callista. But you treat everything like it's yours alone. Because most of it is mine alone. I've been supporting us for the past year while you figure out your career path. I pay the mortgage, the utilities, the groceries. What exactly have you contributed?" The words were harsh, harsher than I'd intended, but they were true. Keith had quit his job as a junior associate at his father's law firm 18 months ago, claiming he needed to find his own path. Since then, he'd cycled through 3 startup ideas, none of which generated income. "I contribute plenty," he said quietly. "Just because I'm not chained to a corporate desk doesn't mean I'm not working." "I'm not asking you to be chained to anything. I'm asking why your parents think they have any claim to property they didn't purchase, don't maintain, and have never contributed to financially. They want to be included in our lives by demanding ownership of my assets. That's not inclusion, Keith. That's control." He grabbed his keys from the counter. "I'm going to my parents' house. Call me when you're ready to be reasonable." The front door slammed, leaving me alone with cold Thai food and documents that proved what I'd always known. This house was mine, but somehow that fact had become a character flaw. Virginia called the next morning. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to her message while drinking coffee on my back porch. "Callista, dear Keith mentioned you're having some concerns about the deed arrangement. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Why don't you come over this afternoon? We can discuss this as a family and clear everything up as a family." Virginia loved that phrase, using it to reframe personal decisions as collective obligations. I called Brenda instead. They're pressuring me. My husband, his parents acting like I'm being unreasonable. You're not being unreasonable. You're being smart. Don't sign anything. Don't agree to anything. And definitely don't go to any family meetings without legal representation. They'll say I'm being paranoid. Let them. Your instincts are correct here, Callista. Something about this doesn't feel right to me either. That afternoon, instead of going to the Brennan's house, I went to the county recorder's office. I wanted to verify something, a nagging suspicion that had been growing since my meeting with Brenda. The clerk helped me pull up property records for the Brennan family home, the sprawling colonial where Keith had grown up. What I found made my blood run cold. Their house was mortgaged to the hilt. Multiple loans, refinances, a home equity line of credit that was maxed out. Lawrence and Virginia, who presented themselves as financially secure pillars of the community, were drowning in debt secured against their property. I pulled more records. Lawrence's office building, which he supposedly owned outright, was also heavily mortgaged. Every property associated with the Brennan name was leveraged to its maximum value. My phone rang. Keith's name appeared on the screen. "Where are you?" he demanded. "My parents are waiting. I'm downtown at the county recorder's office." Silence. "Then why would you be there?" "Looking at property records. Did you know your parents' house is about to be foreclosed on?" More silence, longer this time. "That's none of your business." "It becomes my business when your father tries to add his name to my deed. He's looking for assets to leverage, isn't he? He wants access to my equity to cover his debts." "You don't know what you're talking about." "Then explain it to me, Keith. Make it make sense." He couldn't. The call ended with him mumbling something about privacy and family loyalty. I drove home and started making copies of every document I could find. Mortgage statements, bank records, the original deed, my grandmother's will. Whatever was coming, I needed to be prepared. Paige came over that evening with wine and moral support. We sat in my living room surrounded by papers that documented my financial life. "So his dad is basically bankrupt," Paige summarized after I'd explained everything. "And he wants to use your house as collateral for his next loan." "That's what it looks like." "What are you going to do?" I'd been asking myself that question all day. I'm going to protect what's mine. The following Monday, I met with Brenda again. This time, I brought all the documentation I'd gathered, including the records showing the Brennans' financial situation. "This confirms what I suspected," Brenda said, reviewing the papers. "Your father-in-law is in serious financial trouble. Adding his name to your deed would give him options he doesn't currently have. Can I do anything to prevent them from trying this again?" "You can make your ownership absolutely clear. Record a homestead declaration. Update your will to specifically address this property. And most importantly, don't discuss your financial decisions with them anymore. Keith is going to be furious." Brenda's expression softened. "I know this is hard, but your instincts are protecting you from a very real threat. Trust them." I filed a homestead declaration that afternoon, a legal protection that made it harder for creditors to force the sale of my primary residence. I updated my will, specifying that the house would go to my younger brother Tyler in the event of my death, not to Keith or his family. Tyler lived in Oregon now, working as an engineer, and we'd always been close despite the distance. He'd been the one to talk me through my grandmother's death, the one who'd encouraged me to use the inheritance to build something permanent. And I opened a new bank account, moving my paycheck deposit somewhere the Brennans couldn't monitor. The day after I filed those protective documents, something unexpected happened. An envelope arrived in my mailbox addressed to me in unfamiliar handwriting, no return address. Inside was a photocopy of a bank statement, Lawrence Brennan's personal account, showing a balance of $12,000, and a list of overdraft fees that stretched across 2 pages. Someone was helping me, someone who had access to Lawrence's financial records and wanted me to know exactly how desperate he'd become. I called Brenda immediately. "I just received evidence of Lawrence's bank account anonymously." "Don't tell me the details over the phone," she interrupted. "Bring it to my office, now." An hour later, we sat examining the documents. Brenda's expression grew increasingly grim as she reviewed each page. "This is worse than I thought," she murmured. "He's not just over-leveraged. He's completely insolvent. Every account is overdrawn. He's got credit cards maxed out, personal loans in default. Even his country club membership is showing past due notices." Who would send this to me? Someone who knows what he's trying to do and wants to stop it. Could be a disgruntled client, a former business partner, maybe even someone in his own family. The phone call from Melissa Brennan came 2 days later, though I didn't know who she was yet. She asked to meet in person, suggested a coffee shop on the opposite side of town from where the Brennans lived. She was younger than Lawrence by at least 15 years, with kind eyes and an anxious energy that reminded me of a trapped bird. We sat in a corner booth, away from other customers. I sent you those bank statements, she said, without ordering anything. I know it was risky, possibly illegal, but I couldn't watch him do this to another person. I still have contacts in the family's inner circle, people who work for Lawrence, people who've seen what he's capable of. Getting your address wasn't difficult once I knew you existed. You're Lawrence's sister. Unfortunately, yes. Though I haven't spoken to him in 8 years, not since he destroyed my business and blamed me for his theft. The story spilled out over the next hour. Melissa had owned a successful catering company, built from nothing over a decade of exhausting work. Lawrence convinced her to add his name to her business accounts for tax purposes. He claimed to help her structure the company more efficiently. Within 6 months, he'd systematically drained every account, taking out loans in the company's name, forging her signature on documents using her business credit to fund his lifestyle. By the time I understood what was happening, I was $300,000 in debt, Melissa said, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup she'd finally ordered. I lost everything. My business, my house, my savings. I filed for bankruptcy. Lawrence told the family I'd mismanaged the finances, that he tried to help, but I wouldn't listen. They believed him. How did you find out about me? Virginia called me last month. First time in years. She wanted to know if I'd testify that Lawrence was a generous family member who helped relatives with financial planning. She didn't explicitly say what case, but I have connections still in their neighborhood. I heard about Keith's marriage troubles, and I knew immediately what Lawrence was attempting. So you broke into his accounts. Melissa smiled a sad, bitter expression. I still have his passwords. He never changes them. Thinks he's too smart to be hacked. I've been monitoring his finances for years, waiting for the moment when his schemes finally caught up with him. Why wait? Why not expose him earlier? I tried. I went to the police-hired attorneys, filed complaints with the state bar. But Lawrence is connected, charming, knows how to manipulate the system. Every investigation went nowhere. No one believed the bitter ex-business partner over the respected attorney. She leaned forward. But you're different. You're his daughter-in-law. You have standing credibility, a paper trail. If you fight him, people will pay attention. I thought about the homestead declaration I'd filed, the updated will, the new bank account. I'd been protecting myself, defensively building walls. Melissa was suggesting I go on the offense. What do you need from me? I asked. File a police report about his attempt to access your equity through fraud. Document everything. The pressure that demands these forged loan documents. Create an official record. Once that exists, my complaints won't look like family drama anymore. They'll look like a pattern. We exchanged contact information. Melissa left, first glancing around nervously like she expected Lawrence to materialize from the shadows. I sat alone for another 20 minutes processing everything I'd learned. That evening, I went to the police station. The officer who took my statement was a woman named Officer Rachel Morrison, mid-40s, with gray-streaked hair and an expression that suggested she'd seen everything. Let me make sure I understand, she said after I'd explained the situation. Your father-in-law pressured you to add his name to your property deed, and you have evidence he was preparing to use that access to take out fraudulent loans. Yes, my attorney has copies of loan applications he drafted with my forged signature. Officer Morrison's eyebrows rose. That's not just unethical. That's criminal fraud, identity theft, possibly conspiracy if others were involved. His wife knew. My husband knew or should have known. We'll need to see all your documentation. This kind of financial exploitation often involves multiple victims. If your father-in-law has done this before, there may be others who haven't come forward. I handed over copies of everything Brenda had compiled. Officer Morrison flipped through the pages, her expression growing harder with each document. Mrs. Brennan, I'm going to be honest with you. Cases like this are difficult to prosecute. Financial crimes involving family members get messy. Defendants claim misunderstandings, say they had permission, accuse victims of lying for revenge. Juries get confused by the emotional dynamics. So you won't investigate? I didn't say that. I'm saying be prepared for a long, complicated process. But based on what I'm seeing here, your father-in-law has committed multiple felonies. We'll investigate thoroughly. Keith noticed the changes within a week. He'd been staying at his parents' house since our argument, coming by occasionally to pick up clothes or check the mail. On Friday evening, he showed up with Lawrence in tow. We need to talk, Keith announced, walking past me into the living room. Lawrence followed his expression harder than I'd ever seen it. They both sat on my couch like it was a business meeting, leaving me to stand awkwardly in my own space. Keith tells me you've been investigating our private financial matters. Lawrence began, his voice cold. I looked at public records, property documents that anyone can access, and then drew conclusions that are both insulting and completely unfounded. Are they unfounded? Because those records show multiple mortgages, defaulted loans, and foreclosure notices. That's not an interpretation, Lawrence. That's documentation. His face flushed red. Our financial situation is complex. We've made investments that required temporary liquidity adjustments. By mortgaging everything you own, you have no right to judge decisions you don't understand. Keith stood abruptly. See, this is what I'm dealing with, Dad. She's completely paranoid and disrespectful. I turned to my husband, this man I'd loved enough to marry, and saw a stranger. I'm protecting myself from people who want to steal my equity to cover their bad investments. That's not paranoia. That's common sense. Steele Lawrence's voice rose. We're family, Callista. Family helps each other in times of difficulty. By signing over my house, that's not help. That's collateral. You're being dramatic and selfish. We raised Keith to value family over money, but apparently you don't share those values. The manipulation was so blatant it almost made me laugh. Values. You want to lecture me about values while trying to con me out of my property. Keith moved toward me, his expression a mixture of anger and desperation. Just add their names to the deed, Cal. Stop making this harder than it needs to be. No. One word, but it changed everything. The room went silent. Lawrence stood slowly, his movements deliberate. If you refuse to help this family, he said carefully, there will be consequences. Are you threatening me? I'm informing you. Keith is our son. If you won't act in our family's best interests, we'll need to reconsider whether you should remain part of this family. The ultimatum hung in the air. Sign over my house or lose my marriage. Except I was beginning to realize I'd already lost my marriage. Probably somewhere around the time Keith chose his parents' demands over my autonomy. Get out, I said quietly. Callista Keith started. Get out of my house, both of you. Lawrence grabbed his coat with theatrical slowness. You're making a mistake, Keith. Let's go. Your wife clearly needs time to reconsider her priorities. They left and I locked the door behind them. Then I called Brenda. They just threatened me. Tried to use my marriage as leverage to force me to sign the deed. Document everything she advised, every conversation, every threat, every attempt at coercion. And Callista, you might want to consider whether this marriage is worth saving. I'd been avoiding that question, but it was time to face the truth. Keith hadn't defended me once. Every conflict came down to me versus his parents, with Keith firmly on their side. This wasn't a partnership, it was a hostage situation. The divorce papers were filed 6 weeks later after countless meetings with Dana to prepare every document, gather every piece of evidence, and build an ironclad case. Keith contested everything, demanding half the house value despite having never contributed to its purchase or maintenance. His attorney, one of Lawrence's golf buddies, argued that marital property laws entitled Keith to partial ownership. Before I hired Dana Pritchard, I interviewed 3 other divorce attorneys. The first one, a man named Gordon Fletcher, told me I should consider Keith's emotional contribution to the home. He lived there for 4 years, Gordon explained, leaning back in his expensive leather chair. Courts consider more than just financial investment. There's sweat equity, emotional support, the partnership aspect of marriage. He didn't provide emotional support, I said. He enabled his parents' attempted theft. Gordon shifted uncomfortably. That's a harsh characterization, Mrs. Brennan. From the court's perspective, this looks like a family disagreement about asset management. I walked out of his office and never looked back. The second attorney, a woman named Jennifer Valdez, seemed more promising initially. She reviewed my documents with careful attention, asked pointed questions about the timeline of events, and nodded approvingly at the evidence I'd compiled. You have a strong case for separate properties, she said. But I have to warn you, fighting the Brennans will be expensive. Lawrence knows every family law judge in this county. He'll drag this out, file motion after motion, make your life hell for as long as possible. So I should just give up. I'm saying be realistic about the costs. Legal fees could run over $100, 000. Is keeping the house worth that much to you? The question made my blood boil. Was keeping my own property worth fighting for? What kind of question was that? The third attorney was a young man, fresh from law school, eager and earnest, but clearly in over his head. He kept referring to my house as the marital residence despite my repeated corrections, and suggested mediation as the most harmonious path forward. Mediation requires both parties to negotiate in good faith, I told him. The Brennans don't operate in good faith. They operate in manipulation and fraud. That's a very adversarial mindset, Mrs. Brennan. Perhaps if you approach this with more openness. I left before he could finish that sentence. Dana Pritchard was different from the moment I walked into her office. No expensive leather chairs or ego-boosting wall of diplomas. Just a functional space with case files stacked everywhere, and a woman who looked at me like she actually saw what I was dealing with. "Let me guess," she said before I'd even finished explaining. "You've already talked to other attorneys who told you to be reasonable. Consider Keith's feelings. Think about the costs of fighting." "How did you know?" "Because that's what they always say to women trying to protect assets from predatory men and their families. They frame your self-defense as aggression, your boundaries as selfishness." She pulled out a yellow legal pad. "Here's what I tell my clients. Your property is your property. If he didn't buy it, doesn't pay for it, has no legal claim to it, then he doesn't get it. Period. I don't care how hurt his feelings are." I hired her on the spot. My attorney, a fierce woman named Dana Pritchard, who specialized in spousal property rights, had other ideas. "They're going to argue commingling of assets," Dana explained during our first meeting, saying that because you've been married and living in the house together, he has an ownership stake. "But my name is the only one on the deed." "Exactly. And you have proof of separate funds for the down payment, proof of sole mortgage payments, and documentation of attempted fraud. That last part is key." The court proceedings were brutal. Lawrence sat behind Keith during every hearing, whispering advice, glaring at me whenever our eyes met. Then the forged loan documents were introduced as evidence. Lawrence stood abruptly, his attorney grabbing his arm to pull him back down. The judge's eyes fixed on him. "Mr. Brennan, I would strongly advise you to seek separate counsel regarding the loan documents submitted as evidence. The district attorney's office will be receiving copies of this case file." The gavel fell. I'd won. The house remained mine, entirely mine, with no claim from Keith or his parents. The judge ordered Keith to pay my legal fees and issued a restraining order preventing Lawrence from contacting me or conducting any financial transactions using my name. Outside the courthouse, Paige wrapped me in a hug that nearly knocked me over. "You did it. You actually did it." I had, but the victory felt hollow. I'd lost my marriage, gained enemies in my former in-laws, and spent 8 months fighting for something that should never have been contested. Dana appeared beside us, her leather briefcase clutched professionally. "Congratulations. That was one of the most satisfying rulings I've seen in years. What happens now with Lawrence's loan documents? The DA will investigate. If they determine he committed fraud, he could face criminal charges. At minimum, his legal career is over once the state bar reviews this case." I watched Keith climb into his parents' car across the parking lot. Virginia was crying. Lawrence's face was set in stone. They gambled everything on acquiring my property and lost spectacularly. The divorce was finalized 4 months later after appeals periods expired and all paperwork processed through the system. Keith got his clothes, his laptop, and a few pieces of furniture we bought together. I kept the house, my accounts, and my dignity. But the story doesn't end there. 3 months after the divorce, I received a call from an unknown number. The woman identified herself as Melissa Brennan Lawrence's younger sister. "I heard about what happened," she said without preamble. "I wanted you to know that Lawrence has been pulling these schemes for years. He did something similar to me a decade ago, convinced me to put his name on my business accounts. By the time I realized what was happening, he drained everything." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because the family needs to know what he is. I filed a complaint with the state bar. Others are coming forward now, clients he's defrauded over the years. Your case broke everything open." Within 18 months, Lawrence was disbarred. The investigation revealed decades of financial manipulation, forged documents, and exploitation of clients who trusted him. Virginia filed for divorce, claiming she'd been unaware of his activities despite her own courtroom testimony, where she'd admitted to suspecting his schemes. Keith sent me an email months later from an address I didn't recognize. "I'm sorry, I should have seen what they were doing. I should have protected you instead of them. I was raised to believe family came first, but I didn't understand. They taught me to be complicit in their schemes. I'm in therapy now trying to understand how I became that person." I never responded. Some apologies come too late. I still live in my house, the one I bought with my grandmother's inheritance and my own hard-earned money. Sometimes I walk through the rooms and remember the battle it took to keep them. The vaulted ceilings, the custom built-ins, the backyard where I drink my morning coffee, all of it remains mine. Paige comes over most Sundays. We cook dinner together, drink wine on the porch, and talk about everything except the Brennans. I'm dating again, cautiously leading with honesty about my past and my boundaries. Last month, I ran into Keith at a coffee shop. He looked different. Thinner, tired, older somehow. We exchanged awkward pleasantries. He told me he'd moved to a different state, started working as a teacher, cut ties with Lawrence entirely. I'm glad you fought back, he said before leaving. Someone needed to stop them. I watched him go, this stranger who used to be my husband, and felt nothing but relief. Relief that I trusted my instincts, that I'd refused to sign that deed, that I'd been brave enough to protect what was mine. The realtor who'd helped me buy this house called recently. Property values in the neighborhood have continued rising. My house is now worth close to $670, 000, a remarkable appreciation driven by the neighborhood's rapid development and the housing shortage that had intensified over the past 2 years. All that equity, all that value belongs to me alone. Sometimes I think about that Thanksgiving, about Lawrence cornering me in the hallway with his demands wrapped in false concern. I think about how easily I could have signed those papers, wanting to avoid conflict, wanting to be the good daughter-in-law who valued family harmony over personal protection. But I didn't sign. I asked questions, sought counsel, and discovered the truth. That instinct, that small voice saying, "This isn't right," saved everything I'd worked for. My grandmother left me that inheritance with a note I'd almost forgotten about. I found it again recently, tucked into the bottom of my jewelry box. "Callista, this money is for you alone. Build something that can't be taken, something that belongs entirely to yourself. Don't let anyone convince you that protecting what's yours makes you selfish. Love should never require you to surrender your security." She'd known somehow. She'd understood that women are taught to give to compromise, to put family needs above personal protection. She'd given me the tools to build something solid and the wisdom to guard it fiercely. I framed that note. It hangs in my bedroom now, a reminder that the people who truly love us want us to be secure, not vulnerable. They want us to thrive independently, not depend desperately. The house stands solid around me, every brick and board legally mine. Some battles are worth fighting even when it costs everything else.